Captain Spot. I'm your host, Justin Freeman. 6'1", 274 pounds of fantasy knowledge. It's Week 8 Sunday Night Football. We're talking Cowboys at Eagles. This is a game with a 10.5 point spread in favor of the Eagles. 43-point total. Very, very much on the low side given the way this NFL season has gone. Cowboys going to be without their top two quarterbacks. Spend all that money to get Dak Prescott on the franchise tag. Then you bring in a top-tier backup, theoretically, in Andy Dalton, and now you don't get either of them. We're left with Ben DiNucci season here for the Cowboys. Will they be able to move the football? That's going to be the million-dollar question. Before we hop into the slate, make sure that you are liking, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get this show. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, wherever you're getting your podcasts. Find it on YouTube. Search the Captain Spot. That's the CPT Spot. And you can find the Monday show over on Mayo Media Network. So, enough of the sales pitch. Let's talk about this game where it looks like, it's going to be all about figuring out what to expect from Ben DiNucci. And, I was probably among those most bullish in Andy Dalton's ability to possibly, keep things moving in this Dallas offense. But I think the loss of Dak Prescott revealed that not only was Dak doing a yeoman's job of keeping this offense on schedule, but he was hiding a lot of warts along the rest of that offense, especially along that offensive line, which is not the same Dallas Cowboys offensive line that we have come to know and love and expect big things from. It's an offensive line that's frankly banged up, and they're playing without the vast majority of their normal starters. And it's showing up in a big way. And Dak Prescott made it not seem all that significant. On top of that, the defense not playing well either. Dak just was carrying the load. So to expect Andy Dalton to do that in hindsight was quite foolish. But now it'll be Ben DiNucci season. What can we expect from him? Well, it's tough to tell. We don't have a lot of tape on Ben DiNucci. But he obviously has the weaponry around him to be able to succeed. The question is whether that offensive line can hold up and give him time against the Philadelphia Eagles defense that, can still generate pass rush. So it'll be interesting to figure out what should we expect from Ben DiNucci. And I think that's obviously going to be the crux of what wins a tournament this week is, can you nail that Dallas situation correctly? Because, if you can be a bit smarter than Vegas in this particular instance and lean heavily on a 4-2 Cowboys roster construction, you're going to be in the vast minority. I think people are going to want to put the Eagles in there. But as far as injuries go on this slate, Andy Dalton, the only real injury of concern there for Dallas, and he's doubtful for this game. For the Eagles, there are a handful of injury moves, the first of which is that we should expect activation for Dallas Goedert and Jalen Reagor. Make sure they clear all the necessary steps between now and the 90 minutes before lock will they be published as part of the active roster. But we are expecting to see Reagor and Dallas Goedert, who have been on injured reserve heretofore. They've been activated off injured reserve and now must get to the active roster here on game day. Alshon Jeffrey will be out. Obviously, Deshaun Jackson was put on injured reserve earlier this week, so he's not going to be on your injury report, but he is on IR, so we will not have Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey. So it'll be a lot of Travis Fulgham again, but obviously Jalen Reagor sliding into that starting wide receiver role opposite of Fulgham at this point. Miles Sanders will be out, so we'll get another week of Boston Scott, Corey Clement, Jason Huntley there in the Eagles' backfield. So now that we've got a little bit of an idea of what to expect, obviously 10.5 point spread is pretty aggressive in favor of the Eagles. And this is an Eagles team that's not very good, and that tells you exactly what Vegas thinks about the Cowboys' likelihood of moving the football with Ben DiNucci. So you have to figure out, with limited scoring opportunities, especially on the Dallas side, how many Cowboys can you put in your lineup? Does it make sense to just go full onslaught on the Eagles, go 5+1? And anytime you hear me mentioning 5+1 or 4+2, what we're talking about is, in a 6-player DraftKings Showdown lineup, what should we be doing in terms of players from one team versus players from the other team? Obviously, you could do 3 players from each team. That'd be called a 3-3. We could do 4 players from the favorite and 2 players from the underdog. That'd be 4-2. You could do a 5 versus 1. But you must play at least 1 player from each team in a Showdown slate. So be sure you're keeping that in mind. But obviously, the more extreme you get, the more leverage you're getting on the field. And I think in a low-scoring game, we have to be thinking about ways that guys can pay off with yardage that don't necessarily include touchdowns, or guys that can pay off with a touchdown without necessarily the yardage. It's like we don't necessarily need a huge game from anybody. This could be a really tight slate overall if it remains as low scoring as is currently anticipated. Could be an opportunity for field goal kickers, for sure in this type of slate. Wouldn't surprise me at all, if a kicker in even the captain spot, this week in this particular slate, the lower the overall threshold, the more those guys can pop up in there. So let's talk about the slate itself by going into the pricing, where Ben DiNucci is going to cost you $8,600. And like I say, you got to make a stand here. Can he pay off $8,600? I think in the context of this particular slate, I think you got to play both quarterbacks, Ben DiNucci and Carson Wentz. Now, we don't know what to expect from DiNucci, but we just talked about how this is going to be a low-scoring slate. So what are the odds that on a low-scoring slate, the quarterback is not a top 6 performer? And we're not looking at a slate with a ton of salary constraints. You don't look across the board and say like, oh, how am I going to fit everybody in? That's not necessarily the case this week. You can play a lot of any of the players, combinations of players that you want. So $8,600 Ben DiNucci, I think makes a lot of sense. Even if he only gets you, 12 fantasy points or something like that, which maybe that's high. I don't know. But I don't think that's super high for Ben DiNucci. I think that's reasonable. I think he's going to be in the winning lineup with that score. Carson Wentz, 11-8. Think you got to play him. He's been playing much better football here over the last month than he did in the first month of the season. At the running back position, to me, Ezekiel Elliott's the big $1 million question. $10,800. And I think the logic's ultimately going to be similar to the one for Ben DiNucci. But at 10-8, if Ezekiel Elliott's not going to be living in the red zone like he does when he's playing with Dak Prescott, can he pay off that 10-8 salary? And I think Ezekiel Elliott's workload, the extent to which he's involved in the passing game, gives him the floor that he requires to get there. I don't know if he'll play all 4 quarters if this game gets sideways, but something to keep in mind as we talk about those guys. Tony Pollard, you just know what you're getting with Tony Pollard at this point. He may get some mop-up duties, but he's going to relieve Ezekiel Elliott for a drive or two throughout the game. While he can easily pay off a $1,600 salary, I think the thing I would encourage you to keep in mind is the opportunity cost of a single position. So, you can't just use a simple, salary multiplier to determine whether a guy paid off. Like, you can't just say, I need my guys to go 2x on their salary, which would mean 3.2 fantasy points for Tony Pollard. He could get you 3.2 fantasy points, but, there's an opportunity cost of playing the position itself and taking up that roster spot. And you can't take up a roster spot for a guy who needs 3.2 fantasy points. He's got to have a higher ceiling than that. So overall, not super interested in Tony Pollard, but I would probably sprinkle him in a little bit in case he gets all of the fourth quarter work. Boston Scott, $8,800. Going to be in a much better situation than his counterpart Ezekiel Elliott, and Boston Scott certainly operating as the lead back here for Philadelphia, starting to separate away from Corey Clement in terms of workload. One guy you shouldn't forget about, though, is Jason Huntley. Huntley's a rookie and came in and got some snaps last week and is going to be involved a little bit. I don't know whether the team would actually incentivize or emphasize playing him over Corey Clement at this point, but you'd think they have a little bit of incentive to do so. Huntley, the rookie, over Corey Clement, the veteran, they kind of know what they have in Corey Clement. And Huntley played 10% of the snaps last week compared to Clement's 22%. Boston's got out there for a very nice 69%. As we look at the pass catchers, we talked about this on the Dallas side, when we're talking about Ben DiNucci. Amari Cooper, 8,200. CeeDee Lamb, 6,600. Michael Gallup, 3,400. That's your starting 3-wide set. It continues to be odd to me that Michael Gallup does not get more targets in this offense. And maybe Ben DiNucci changes that a little bit. But for the extent to which Michael Gallup is on the field, which is just always, he's always on the field. And he's always running routes. But he does not get super targeted. And maybe it's just where he runs his routes on the field. A little bit of a field stretcher type. Not operating across the middle for, easy passing catches like Amari Cooper is. But overall, his salary at $3,400 makes him really, really interesting. Especially if the team does go into catch-up mode. You can see Gallup get a few more targets, but overall, it's just a really discouraging target share. They're really flowing through Amari Cooper. And so can Amari Cooper pay off $8,200, without a guaranteed, usage role in the red zone? They may not get to the red zone very frequently. And if they only get there once or twice throughout the game and his is not the number that gets called, can he pay off $8,200? I think that makes it really interesting. CeeDee Lamb, $6,600, just gives you a nice sort of middle ground between Cooper and Gallup. Dalton Schultz at $3,600, though, is actually really interesting because it kind of tends to be the safety valve option. Therefore, a young quarterback without a whole lot of experience can go in and gobble up some targets and be involved in the red zone. Got 19% of the targets last week, did Dalton Schultz against Washington. And he's out there a lot. He's running about 70% of the team's routes week in, week out. Really over 70% here ever since we saw Blake Jarwin go down. We're talking about Cedric Wilson, Noah Brown, Blake Bell. I don't think you can use those guys. There's no need to go quite that deep there on the Dallas side. But on the Philly side, with the pass catchers, we obviously talked about the return of Jalen Reagor, Dallas Goedert. Reagor cost you $4,400, super cheap, and Dallas Goedert $7,800 this week. He'll be the second highest priced pass catcher for Philadelphia behind Fulgham. And so I expect Dallas Goedert to just inherit a huge workload. He instantly slides in ahead of Richard Rodgers, who is $5,600 as a starting tight end. And I don't know. I guess there's a narrative out there that Goddard wouldn't get a full workload in his first game back, and maybe there's something to that. But this guy is just open across the middle of the field. He's exactly where exactly where Carson Wentz wants to find his open players, right in the middle of the field. He's heavily involved in the red zone. He just checks all the boxes. I think we'll be talking about Dallas Goedert as a top 4 or 5 DFS play in general on main slates moving forward. So I think I'm very interested in playing him at $7,800. Just make sure, as we mentioned, that for he and Reagor, that we're getting good news prior to lock. Travis Fulgham, $9,200. I think he maintains his role as the number one receiver despite Jalen Reagor coming back. I think they'll just be used a bit differently. Fulgham more of the chain mover and Reagor more of the field stretcher. So just adjust those ranks accordingly. Greg Ward at $5K. I think he kind of gets bumped off the field. He'll be used in 3 wide sets more than likely. But I'm not super interested in playing Greg Ward. John Hightower, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, these are guys that, once again, we're not super interested in. So the good news is that we can kind of pare our player pool down a little bit in this game. And let's take a look at our captain assignments where, surprisingly, it's Amari Cooper as the leading captain, followed closely by Carson Wentz, quarterback captain there. So this could be a really interesting slate to go quarterback captain with Carson Wentz, as he might spread the ball out to those guys that we mentioned, Jalen Reagor, Dallas Goedert, even in the backfield to Boston Scott can be involved in the passing game. So could be a good script there for Carson Wentz. But Cooper, it's interesting because, if Ben DiNucci can even look reasonably serviceable, he'll be able to float Amari Cooper's production given the amount of volume. He's just, even if Ben DiNucci doesn't have a great game, Amari Cooper could still catch, 8 balls for 100 yards without a touchdown, and that might be good enough for captain on this slate. Fulgham and Boston Scott after that, followed by Ezekiel Elliott, CeeDee Lamb, and Dallas Goedert. And then there's a big drop-off, so I think that's the spot where we probably want to stop thinking about playing those guys after that group. Looking at our flexes, it is the top 2 quarterbacks appearing most frequently in the flex. It's Carson Wentz and Ben DiNucci, followed by Ezekiel Elliott, Amari Cooper, Travis Fulgham, Boston Scott, CeeDee Lamb, Dallas Goedert. And so, overall, I think you're going to have to figure out where the ball's going. That's a showdown in general, right? You're going to figure out where it's going and figure out how you're going to mix in your defenses and kickers this week as well. It's going to be a low-scoring slate. I think the Eagles are incentivized to just bring the kitchen sink and throw it at Ben DiNucci on the Dallas offensive side of the football. So what will happen when they try to get after the passer? How will that work for each of these teams? It should be interesting to see. We'll have to figure that out. For now, I am I am high on Goddard. I would like to see him. I think there's a lot more potential than what's even showing up there in the simulations for him to sort of emerge as the leading scorer on the slate. So overall, and I think it's fun to think about, like, what if Ben DiNucci is actually good? You could probably get a lot of leverage on the field building heavy Cowboys lineups. That would be a lot of fun too, and you know how concentrated the targets are in that offense. So overall, that's going to do it for us this week for Sunday night edition. Make sure you find the Monday night edition over on Mayo Media Network. Hope you guys have a great day. Talk to you soon.